Europe. My wife used to holler when a shampoo commercial came on the German TV, because they usually had the young lady in the shower topless. That was, and in fact, when we went to the beaches, they didn't have changing rooms. People came to the beach, looked around, decided, oh, I guess I'll go in. And they took their clothes off and maybe put on a bathing suit, but right in front of everyone, they take everything off and put on the bathing suit. So there's a difference of opinion with regard to what is proper, I suppose, right? And when the one New Year's Eve, there were individuals who had migrated to Germany from a Middle Eastern country that were Islamic, and they were there, and everybody was in a celebratory mood, and German women often dress very differently than would be legal in the Middle East, as you can imagine. And as a result, they ended up assaulting some of the women, maybe more than assault. There's an argument. Well, these men are not trained from childhood up to be familiar with what women might look like and to be able to control themselves. So in a sense, this is actually inimical to cultures where women are not allowed to appear, outside of a burqa, or whatever, or without a male family member to make sure that they're safe, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of, in fact, there's more people in the world that live that way than live in Northern European fashion, et cetera. And when you think, I see articles quite frequently of women who are raised in Western, first world developed countries, who then go to work somewhere. Like the most recent article I read was a woman working in a small town in India and trying to live like a modern American woman in this town, and not realizing that she needed male protection. She should not go out at night, just 2 blocks to her apartment when she's walking from a party. She should have taken the advice of the male that threw the party, that he would escort her home, although that could have been dangerous too. In any case, she was assaulted on her 2-block walk home. So outside of very privileged places, these kinds of issues are certainly still the case, and the relationships that people have are still the case. And so when you hear how priests are, at least occasionally, in trouble for the things that they do with children, that's actually, in a worldwide sense, more common than it would be here. And if you have a worldwide church and you have individuals in that church that have that kind of relationship, it doesn't surprise me that the hierarchy did not consider it too significant. They would just take the person who got in trouble and move them somewhere else. Whereas in the United States, of course, that kind of behavior is illegal, and you could go to jail, of course. And even locally, we hear about those kinds of issues in villages and so on. And when you study the culture of those villages, what I think becomes obvious is that basically in small communities, people had sex with everybody, including their children. Am I going to be fired? No, I'm just reporting what I've read. I'm obviously not privy to that. But what happened was social workers from the privileged class in a first world country went to those villages and began teaching people that was abuse. And once your understanding of your relationships with your community have been reframed by a new model. You know, instead of the one model where this is the way people who love one another treat one another, all of a sudden now you have a model that says you've been abused. You believe that, and now, of course, the relationship you have with your family and your community is through that vision, as opposed to the one that was the loving community relationship, you know, that you had before. So, remember, question? Remember Adam and Eve, the fall. Augustine's interpretation, my interpretation of Augustine's interpretation, can't have a real literal interpretation of what Augustine said, because remember, that's all medical, right? But what was he saying? I think he was saying that it's our perception of evil that makes evil there. I mean, the facts of the case are there, but your perception of it is what changes your, you know, how you view it as good or evil. Pick music. You know, music wins a prize, and you listen to it and you think, oh, that's evil music. You know, I'm thinking of Oscar winner. Trigger warning for those of you who So that song won the Oscar that year. It was the best song American theater or movies produced. It's not my fault, and my perception of that, I mean, you know, I grew up thinking Wagner was good music. Richard Wagner, dun 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 dun. Yeah, that's it. You don't have a 100-piece orchestra. Why call it good music? Remember when the Beatles came out in '64? Well, the night that they played on the Ed Sullivan Show, I didn't watch it. I didn't even know it was a thing. I came in to school the next day and everybody was talking about, did you see that? What? And then when I did see it, I was thinking, this is 4 guys with haircuts a lot like mine at the time, bowl cut, that didn't really have much to qualify for being musical, except that they played guitars and Ringo with the drums, and they kept, you know, singing these songs, which I thought, you compare that to the Ninth Symphony. You know, if you could go to the Ninth Symphony, why would you listen to the Beatles, you know, playing it up? And then this, well, what makes it good or bad? What makes music or beauty good or bad? Your perception of it. How you have been trained to interpret your experience. Same thing with literature, right? So if you think of it this way, Augustine certainly seems like the best explanation for why there's good and evil in the world. It's focused on our perception of it, and what model do you use to frame it, etc. Is there an actual, real truth out there? So, speaking of which, when we look at Galileo, I highly recommend, for those that like to read, reading hopefully I will find, I'm not remembering. Well, there's lots of them, actually. But I'm trying to think, the one is just called Galileo. I might think of the name of the author. But in the biography, it pointed out that, number one, Galileo already knew the Pope, and Galileo was absolutely convinced, of course, as you all know, that Copernicus was correct, and that the sun was the center of the solar, what then would be called the solar system, right? The Pope, in discussing this with him, as I think Haberman? I don't think it's Haberman. Heilbronn, that's the one I meant. Heilbronn. I was close. I was getting there, at least going through the alphabet, right? So, the Pope understood the sense that there were different models, and understood that there was one model that worked and another model. Galileo, the big argument was that it was a more easy mathematical model to explain things. By using Copernicus's model, you could do away with the trouble with the planet's retrograde motions. If you're familiar with it, right? If you're looking at the Ptolemaic system, you had to explain periodic times where the planets that were, supposed to be going this way, periodically stopped and went back a little bit and then back again. The appearance from here gives us that sense of a retrograde motion, and they came up with epicycles to explain that, right? That they're every once in a while, and the big concern is that everything ought to be circular, because everything above the earth is closer to the divine, and circularity was considered to be divine. Well, actually, Copernicus's model was harder to actually mathematically predict where planets were going to be than Ptolemy's counting the epicycles, right? And that's because it wasn't a circle. Once we get to Kepler realizes, wait a minute, it's an ellipse, right? There's a point on the, it's not the center, but because of how it goes. So it's an ellipse, not a circle. And now they could explain things mathematically accurately. But the thing is, if you're realizing that both of these are models, it's not the case that one is true and the other one is false, right? The Pope was actually of that point of view, and he tried to explain it to Galileo, and Galileo just was too dense to get it. So thank you to Heilbronn here, that my understanding of the relationship between Galileo being the scientist that came to realize that there was a true model out there and they had it all wrong, and then, in conflict with them, etc., which is quite impressive to read how the whole thing all worked out and so on. You actually get the impression that, wait a minute, he was not the smart one. The Pope was the smart one, trying to prevent all heck breaking loose among those that became familiar with the different idea. I mean, people would just laugh at you if you said that the sun was the center and the earth was moving. I mean, what? You're ridiculous. This isn't moving. It was so obvious. Galileo was the idiot, basically. And as more people believed that, the more hysteria broke out over people arguing over whether the earth moved or not. Think about how, even in this class, when I introduced to some of you who I don't think had seen it before, the model that we're using now about how all the planets are moving along with the sun, going around the galactic center, right? You know, whoa. You know, how did people react to that? An awful lot of you really wanted to react to saying, well, this is the true way things move. You know, yeah, you can have this view, but this is the way it really is. Well, that's exactly the wrong thing. It's not that one model is true and the other models are false, although yes, you do have to fix them when you find something wrong with them. Like, as Galileo pointed out, Venus didn't actually go around the Earth, it went around the sun. And that's, you know, his